in every little detail of your script what you want on there. You don't need to add flourishes. Just tell them how it is. Tell them what the sights, sounds, and smells are of the scene. Just you can be verbose. It's not like especially if you're not directing your own stuff. You got to make sure that you lay it all out there. So it helps everybody get along. It's a blueprint.
Welcome back to Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. I'm your host, Brian Gary. In our latest episode, I get to speak with A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms co-creator and showrunner, Ira Parker. We talk about the creative challenges of world building, connecting to the Game of Thrones and House of Dragons universe, and so much more. Listen and subscribe to Third and Fairfax on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcasting app of choice. And watch full episodes on the Writers Guild of America West YouTube channel. And now, here's my conversation with Ira Parker. And I have the pleasure of speaking with Ira Parker, writer, showrunner, producer, and most notably of Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, which is on HBO. Very successful launch of the show. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And before we get into the show itself, I kind of want to start with some general questions, and then we'll hone in on some specifics. So the first question for you as a creator, as a showrunner, so you're balancing both the writing and the producing. So this question comes at someone like yourself doubly, and that is the notion of scale. So if you look at your career, you've got Game of Thrones, so you've got Dragon, you've got the House of the Dragon, you've got Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, you've got The Last Ship. Then all of a sudden, you also have Better Things and 4 in the Morning. And so as you're dealing with the story that's at the center of these, because obviously story is prime, we're always focused on the story. How do you then make that story relatable in these varying degrees of scale, from something that's gigantic to something that, let's just say, the budgets for 4 in the Morning weren't what you have to work with now, and especially not when you were working with, say, in House of the Dragon. So how do you handle scale but still maintain a relatable story?
I think the easiest answer is that you pay no attention to scale. It's certainly it doesn't feel like you're paying much attention when you're to scale in any of those writers' rooms that you've named. It's you're having fun with the characters, you're having fun with the story, and you're getting into things and mixing it up and trying to do the very best job. And I think everybody thinks that their show is going to be viewed by 100 million people worldwide, no matter what it is. The goal is always, to get a lot of eyeballs on your thing. Even if it starts small, you want that word of mouth to pick up and for everybody to eventually, see this great thing that you have worked very hard on. And it often doesn't work out that way, but hopefully the process was enjoyable enough that it allows you to go and work with equal optimism on the next thing.
Let's talk about then scale of story. So that's kind of like the scale of the audience or the promotion into the zeitgeist piece of content, but or a show, movie, film, television. But from a story standpoint, when people think of Game of Thrones, they think of this gigantic world that literally is a lesson in not only world building that Martin did on the page, but also in the first seasons of Game of Thrones was building this massive world. And you're entering into that, House of the Dragon, as opposed to Better Things, where it's that family. You know what I mean? And so it's about the scale of the story and the world of the story and managing both of those ends of that spectrum. So the story world scale.
No, of course. Look, I suppose. Look, I'm still gonna throw it back to the same answer. It's a Better Things is a story about a matriarch with her 3 insane children. And House of the Dragon is not that far off. You switch a couple roles around, and you're still basically dealing with the same issues. Look, Game of Thrones is maybe a little bit of a different beast because it was so epic and massive in scale. House of the Dragon is obviously has the spectacular component to it, has the dragons and the magic and the scale of those sets, and the amount of detail that goes into that world is incredible. But really, at the end of the day, you're you're telling small stories about what it is to be a daughter and grow up in that world, and with certain expectations, or certain, I guess, unexpectations. Would you expect more things of yourself than maybe other do people do around you? I think I could throw that on to a couple of the Fox girls as well too. Certainly we're dealing with that in Dunk and Egg and the Night of the Seven Kingdoms. It's, if anything, our scale may be even smaller than it was on Better Things, because we only have one POV character. We could bounce around between uh Celia Emery and Pamela and all the kids, and we had so many places to go. This is Peter Claffey to Peter Claffey, Dunk to Dunk to Dunk. Every now and then you get a little bit of Egg. But for the most part, it is quite a quiet little coming of age story. And, you can find versions of that everywhere, from the very first show I started on, Rogue, to Last Ship, which is people contained together inside a U.S. Navy destroyer, the post-apocalypse. It still ultimately ends up becoming about those personal relationships, and you finding uh, the story in those smaller moments. It's really hard to maintain story on such a massive scale all the time, with just stakes that are through the roof. Eventually, people have to sort of come back to earth and relate to each other as human beings.
It's a great answer, and that's kind of where not only was I hoping you'd go, but that's not a surprising answer given how core your characters are and how well you draw characters and how I know you've gotten a few times the notion of, "Duh, aren't you more into comedy?" And it's just like, no, he creates human beings, and comedy is part, and whether the whole spectrum of comedy, absurdist all the way to laugh out loud, because you bring a healthy dose of comedy into this episode, but it's human comedy. It's not set up joke, and so
Yeah.
you draw these very real human characters.
There's there's a I would say a lot more comedy in day-to-day life than in most TV shows these days. Maybe maybe ever. It's there's comedy is not only just something we do to entertain each other, but it's something, it's massively ingrained in our, you know, defense mechanisms, of how we just get on with the world and deal with all of the absolute horrible things that creep in unstoppably, from cradle to grave. And so, there's certainly, I've never quite understood uh shows that take their drama completely seriously. It's not that I haven't ever liked shows like that. I love certain shows like that. It's a mood, it's a style, it's a stylization. But it's we are, specifically in the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, trying to be as grounded and earthy as possible. And I think that absurdist comedy just had to naturally sneak in because Dunk is an absurd character. He's
Mhm.
this 7 foot tall giant uh wandering through Westeros, the Forrest Gump of Westeros. It's uh there's a uh in a lot of ways that's not actually true, but I think it's an easy way to sort of align the show with something that people are familiar with. So I've mentioned that a few times.
You referred to it originally as, or in our part of our conversation, like coming of age. And so I'm curious about, obviously you've talked before about, you were working with Ryan Condal, and you got kind of approached about this. I'll let you decide if you want to tell that story again on this, how you got approached for doing this. But at some point you had to meet with George R. R. Martin, and so there's the notion of preparing for a pitch, and then there's preparing to go and talk to this, world famous author. You've kind of been inside of this world, but you're about ready to embark on what he has referred to as some of the stories that are most close to his heart, things that he loves the most about this world. This just gigantic, sprawling world that he's created. That the Dunk as a character, but the Dunk and Egg series is so close to him. How did you prepare to go and have that conversation? Because, like every author, they have the things they like and the things they don't like about how their work has been adapted. So nothing is ever perfect, nothing is ever terrible, but there's always a moment of trust where he's got to hand the reins over to you. And so, how did you prepare for that conversation to meet with this particular person that you were going to, embark on this journey with?
Yeah, look, I would say uh massive, massive over preparation, and then pretending like it's just all natural and that you just had it all, there the whole time. Uh, uh, it was even for the very first, what I thought was my pitch for the show to HBO. I spent a week just, I think I had like 15, 20 pages of notes going into this meeting to realize that all of a sudden I actually already had the job and I didn't need any of this stuff. And even the stuff that I had prepared, they didn't really want. They already sort of, uh, you know, uh, had an idea, and I didn't even realize at that point that they didn't want 10 1-hour episodes, that they're like, no, 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 it's okay. We understand that the novellas are shorter. My original idea was, I'm like, in order to do that, we have to do all three novellas for one season. That could be the only way that we're ever going to make it to the end of this. No, 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 we can have shorter episodes. We can have, less episodes count. So obviously after that, I just had to go and I had to make George believe. And look, hopefully I did it the old fashioned way, which is just loving genuinely loving the material that I was trying to work on with him. It's one of his favorite pieces of his own writing, and it's one of my favorite pieces of his writing. So we had that in common. I learned everything I could about the history of Westeros in this period, and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. I made a million notes. I filled notebooks, and I had lots of ideas, and I knew everything that was possibly out there has ever been said about these characters. Just a lot of research, a lot of work, just like you're studying for an exam. You're cramming, you get it all in, and then you hope you don't say the wrong thing when you get in there. And the truth is I did all that work, but I knew when I was going there that my primary goal was to listen as much as possible for that weekend that I was there. We spent a couple days together, and I wanted to ask questions. I wanted to listen to his responses. I wanted to make notes, and I was actually hoping he wouldn't grill me too much on what my ideas were going to be to, say, expand into this world yet, because I wasn't sure I was actually, having not really spoken to him before that, ready to make those decisions yet.
Mhm.
But he did. And then I got lucky. The first couple ones that I gave him hit him exactly right, and it opened up our conversation and it opened him up a little bit. And I don't think we used anything that of those, pitches ultimately. But just knowing that you're on the same page, that you're both, rowing in the same direction, uh, uh, everybody can sort of sit back in their chair and relax and just talk like friends, talk like fans.
So, Night of the Seven Kingdoms, to kind of give some more context, is set before Game of Thrones, kind of nestled in that world. So, it's got context, okay, for the people who are fans of the show, or obviously around the world, fans of his books. These novellas, as you point out, there's a series of these novellas. He has plans potentially for more novellas, but these are very kind of singular stories of which it's not surprising that George R. R. Martin thought that they might be just movies, just one-off movies, standalone, because they are kind of standalone stories. It's almost like Canterbury Tales in that sense, like the way it kind of
Yeah.
moves through the piece. So let's talk a bit about adaptation. As you are now adapting these books, you've already been inside of this world of which, in many ways, House of the Dragon has thinner material to start with. It's not really
Yeah.
like a set of books. It's kind of like an encyclopedia. It's in the world of it, but you actually have drawn characters and stories that were fleshed out in here. There's a challenge with both your expectations creatively. Obviously, you're working with an author who's not only alive but is involved, and there's the audience now who has over a decade worth of exposure to this world, and there's these expectations. So that's a lot to navigate for adaptation. And I know just from what you've said before, you wanted to be faithful That's also a blessing and a curse word in terms of adapting material. So I'm just curious how you approach creatively for yourself. Take out, some of these other, conditions, but what you wanted to get out of the adaptation of this.
And look, I, one of the very, very first things I did was actually, it was almost a transcription of what that first novella was, just into final draft. I would just, leave. I knew, I knew pretty early on what I wanted the beginning and ends of all the episodes to be.
Mhm.
Uh, then, so I went and I just created 6 documents, and I took all of the pages in between those story markers, and I, added that in to each document. And then I said, okay, these have to be on average, 35 to 45 pages. How many pages do I need to add each? This sounds really mathematical, and I guess it was, but we were just trying to figure out.
You do have an economics degree. So there you go. So maybe you were being very
Yeah,
economical
geez,
with it.
I thought I never used that thing. Yeah. No, look, just trying to figure out um, uh, where things need to be added, how much needs to be added. Obviously you look at some yeah, spoiler. Obviously you look at we do the whole big battle, we get to the end of something very big at the end of 5, and it leaves almost nothing in the book for 6. Very, so we knew 6 was going to be an episode of large amount of creation. There were a couple early ones where we had, it was about half every episode in truth. When all drawn, it was about 50% of what we needed to get us there. And so we had to create another 50%, which is a very reasonable amount in a faithful adaptation. Because all you get to do, assuming that everybody is on board, and I include, George and HBO in this, with not adding any story. That was one of the very first things that I pitched to George, was that the story is the story. I'm not going to take Dunk off on any side tangential adventures. The beginning, the beginning, middle is the middle, the end is the end. Uh, and we're going to add characterization. We're going to expand the Dunk and Egg relationship, give them more of a chance to know each other. We're going to, spend more time with people like Lionel Baratheon, who have, I think, one line at the very end of the novella in his of dialogue. But now, obviously, he's in, I think, every single episode. Little things, and we're gonna enjoy the world. We're going to uh, enjoy Westeros. We're at a tournament. We're camping. It's Coachella or Glastonbury. It should feel like it's fun.
Yeah.
But when you don't add story, obviously, people get a little nervous because you're in danger of it feeling like you're just, you know, drawing things out.
Mhm.
And there are very few people on planet Earth who I would say have successfully convinced the world that they're the ones capable of just writing a hangout movie or show and having audiences tune in every single week enjoying themselves. And so where is the excitement coming from? Where is the draw to continue on? And obviously we knew we had a huge head start with Dunk because he's just such a likable character. And we knew he had a big head start with the fact that Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon had very well established for people what can happen in Westeros. So there was a sense of expectation, like, okay, go with us. It might be a little slow at the beginning, but we're gonna give you something, don't worry. And and ultimately everybody sort of bought into that. And so we didn't have to go too far. We weren't creating crazy storylines for Dunk. We didn't have to break POV. The novellas are only in Dunk's POV. It's not like obviously the main series, which changes every chapter. We are with we are with him from beginning to end. We added a couple little ones for Egg throughout the show when it felt absolutely necessary. But the truth is we didn't have the ability, even though it would have been very interesting, I think, to go and tell, the story of what's really going on behind the scenes with the Targaryens. We couldn't ever break that. If we were going to see a scene with the Targaryens, it had to be through Dunk's lens. And so that obviously it just cuts out a big chunk of storytelling ability when you say you're not going to do that. there was at one point we were going to do a Big Tenzel storyline. We were going to go behind the scenes with her, and that ended up coming, from quite sizable all the way down to back to the book. Um, it's simply just look. I don't know what to chalk it up to, and other than I remember when George was talking to me very early on, he said, I've tried writing egg POV chapters, and they just never really worked for me. I just kept coming back to Dunk, and that's ultimately what we found too. Is
Mhm.
that we just kept coming back to Dunk. So it was limiting, but in that it made it have to really hit for us. Every single little bit of time that we took off either just had to look glorious, had to, you know, lend itself to this world that we were building, uh, had to expand upon, what Dunk is really suffering from and, what's going on inside of that head. I think if you read the novella, you'll see is one of the most anxious characters and, in all of Westeros world. And then we have to have a lot of fun and ultimately at the moment people have gone with us on this fun journey. They're willing to uh, indulge in the lighter side of Westeros. Now, of course, we've turned a corner and we're back into proper Westeros. But uh, yeah, knowing how much we had, knowing how much was going to be a pretty much direct adaptation, gave us a really gave us a gave us a target to hit. At least we knew what type of things we had to create and how much.
Interesting you bring up George R. R. Martin, who is not scared at all of writing from multiple point of views. In any one of those books, each chapter can be from someone different, and that was the fun and challenge of tracking that show. If you weren't with it all along, is the different points of views from all those houses, and you know this relatable character in Dunk and like his George's instinct, you said yours and the show's instinct to really just stay grounded in that one singular point of view is interesting because it's an extremely relatable character because of where he is in his life, how much he still has to lose, even though he's still at the beginning of the journey, and how aware, for even how young and naive sometimes, but how aware he is of his own insecurities. And that's a really relatable thing, I think, especially to different generations. I mean, I'm Gen X, so we're cynical to the core. But millennials, Gen Z, I think they're far more attuned to that type of wearing that level of vulnerability on the outside and contending with it. And so it's a really kind of genuine character matched perfectly for the times. So I'm just curious, what it was like to get into the mind of that dramaturgically. You're now bringing it from the page where you have to make choices to take the inside voice out, to make the internal world externalized in drama.
Yes, no, easy. I millennialized, George's brilliant, work that he did, on Dunk and making him basically a stoic who just deals with everything on the inside. And yeah, I put it all on the outside. But no, look, we got to do the reason that I loved these novellas so much. And the reason I think so many people are responding to this and have responded to the novellas over the years is that we all very much see ourselves in Dunk. We have all, at some point or another, experienced what he is experiencing in the Hedge Knight, which is that I want something better than what my parents had. I want to go off and I want to do the hard thing. Then the reality of the hard thing strikes you. And it becomes very easy to just turn around. It becomes very easy to set a course, go out there, try, realize that, you've been rejected and just say, okay, well, it wasn't meant to be and go, and I think we see that a couple times in Dunk that he's sort of unsure. He's going to Ashford, but is he going to Ashford? And it's almost that first meeting with Egg where this kid sort of challenges him. And he's just like, yeah, I'm going to fucking, be a knight. Of course, I'm going to go enter the tourney, you little shit. And I love that it was, to prove, a sass mouthed kid wrong that, everything has changed for Duncan his life. But then there's other moments where when he gets there and he meets the steward of the games who gives him a quick once over, decides that this kid belongs nowhere close to this tournament. Uh, but then there's just something guileless in Dunk, something genuine and earnest that makes this guy almost take pity on him and and give him a way in. Just when Dunk had sort of turned away and accepted that rejection, he was going to go home. And same with Steely Pate, seeing this guy show up looking for some armor, and he clearly has no idea what this is going to cost him, how he's going to get it. Um, and but Steely Pate again just takes pity on him. Just something about Dunk uh, charms him, or whatever the opposite of charm is, him. And and he helps him out just a little bit, not for not charity, but just a little bit. And I know that I have had so many of those moments in my life where I was really just about ready to give up. And certainly, look, that's a common experience, anyone in any sort of creative field, but also really in every field. I mean, who doesn't go into get their science degree or engineering degree, and go off to work and realize that there's all this politicking going on, and the job that they want is not what they thought it was going to be, and it's just data entry at the beginning, and it's going to be so. And what have I spent my life doing this for? And it just takes that one person in your life at the right time to say, you know what, just just here, let me help you out. Just go a little bit more. Just go a little bit more and see. And I've had that, I think, at every stage in my life, from childhood to still happening now, and I think it was very important to highlight those people and to tell that story, um, uh, that it didn't have to go well for Dunk, that he didn't have this, ironclad ambition. He didn't always know things were going to work out. He didn't necessarily fight through it. He got a little lucky. He got a little bit of help, because even the very best of us get that. What he has is, he 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 took it. He somebody, offered him just a little bit more, and he took the next step towards that. And, tentative as it may be, and that's really his only superpower in this world. And we're going to see that in episode 5, a little bit in our flashback. And I think hopefully we'll recognize it all throughout his journey, hopefully for the rest of his life, that the only thing he does well is just gets up and he puts one foot in front of the other, and he just sort of keeps moving on. And I certainly know that I could I could blame a lot of the successes in my life on that very thing. Just, no skill or talent or any, special thing, but just, one foot in front of the other. You just keep going. You be thoughtful. You care. You try and put in the hard work, and uh, you know, and who knows, good, and as we will see, some bad things happen along the way. And then you die, and that's your life.
Perseverance. The
Yeah.
um always reminded of the movie Rocky. And for those kids out there, but Rocky lost. Spoiler alert from a movie from the 70s. He lost in that first movie. But at the end, it's such a triumph of just showing up, doing the work, and surviving and perseverance, that it's okay that he didn't win the match, the boxing match. It didn't matter. He was victorious at that moment at the end of the movie. So, question for
I
you
I I
on,
think I
oh, go
I
ahead.
think I even at one point wrote a scene with Dunk going to the lists at night, like the night before the big thing, and just sort of hanging out, and somebody was there like, "What are you doing here?" And he
Yeah.
was just, sort of taking it in like Rocky, and then I just realized, I was just like, maybe this is just a little bit too close to call it homage anymore. So, anyways.
um, it's collaborative art. This, especially in television, multiple people working on it. Film's no different, but from the creative standpoint, the writing especially gets very, very collaborative. You had an interesting dynamic because again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that you had a trust with George R. R. Martin, in which you would share him with him drafts, and there'd be a collaborative process. Everyone always focuses on what's the worst note you ever got. Like, okay, fine, you can always dunk on that, but what's the best note that you ever got from George R. R. Martin? And that doesn't have to be one that's a compliment. It doesn't have to be one that was just like, oh my God, you are the most brilliant human being ever, Ira. No, it's like, what's the note that you just got from him? You're like, oh man, that's really good. You know?
I remember. Well, look, there was a little one. There was a note. It was a good reminder to me on clarity of writing and intention. Where I think it was like the second episode. once Egg had joined Dunk at his camp, and in the morning I wrote like Dunk kicks Egg awake and says, "Come on, get up, boy. There's work to do." And I remember George getting on the phone with me after he's just like, "Dunk would never kick Egg. Like, what are you?" And I just like, "No, no, it was like it was, it was like a, prodding him awake. Like, it's yeah." And I just and but it was a very important reminder of the because obviously they push each other a lot. Egg takes a lot of shots. Dunk takes a lot of shots. And Dunk doesn't, suffer Egg shit, or at least he pretends not to. He tries to put up a tough exterior. He's always threatening the clouts in the ear, you know. Uh, and I even think, that there might be something in those novellas quite similar to the way that I wrote it. But for another, time and discussion. Uh, but uh, but to protect this relationship, uh, you can't take anything for granted. The story and the relationship of the characters may be up in your head, but these scripts are going to be read not just by George, but uh, by world class artists all around the world, and you better make sure everybody understands exactly what is going on, so that you're all. Again, I can't believe I'm going back to this cliche twice. I never used this pulling in the
Well,
same direction.
yeah, row in the same direction. Yeah,
Jesus
but it
Christ.
is. But no, but it is very fitting. I mean, it's like you ever watch we're in the Olympics, the Winter Olympics, but you watch the Summer Olympics, those teams, the synchronization of being able to row, that's the only way that they can compete and win. But same thing, if you're not rowing in the same direction, you're not pulling in the same direction, like that's catastrophic.
It is, and it also it's very important for a creator and a showrunner, just for even if they don't have a good handle on it, for them to convince everybody on the show that they have a clear intention for what it should be, and that they are not contradicting themselves. And as soon as people start getting different ideas about what a scene means, they think that you're the fault. They think that you're the reason for that, and you are. And so you have to, even if you haven't contradicted themselves, if they have, you know, thought about a scene in a certain way and the production designers thought about it in a different way, all of a sudden it feels like, oh no, this is all going to hell. So you got to be very careful, and you got to communicate a lot, something I'm definitely getting better at. Very specifically, very, in every little detail of your script, what you want on there. You don't need to add flourishes. Just tell them how it is. Tell them what the, sights, sounds, and smells are of the scene. Just you can be verbose. It's not like especially if you're not directing your own stuff. You got to make sure that you lay it all out there. So it helps everybody get along. It's a blueprint.
Let me double click on that, especially as we'll kind of bifurcate the directions, the kind of the cinematic dramaturgy there. But then now let's talk about character and finding the voice, because obviously there's dialogue in his books, and George R. R. Martin writes really good dialogue, but that's only 50%. You're still carrying voiceover into the other parts that you're creating. So how do you approach, whether it's in this case, you're coming in as the showrunner, but other shows in which you've entered into a world in which characters are either forming or exist? How do you approach the voice? How do you find the voice of a character? Either one that you're originating or one that you are coming to know as a collaborator coming into a show.
The thing that I always do, at least, is just drown out all the other creative noise with only that voice. So if it's a TV show that's been running for a couple seasons, just watching those TV shows on repeat over and over and over again until until I know them like I know The Simpsons, and it's just there, and I can just do those voices. I can write those characters. With George, it was, a combination of, watching the show, but also just reading those books over and over and over again, and just making sure to immerse myself in that language, and how, his dialogue and his characters come out of that language. Sometimes, whenever I would get stuck, just turn it back to, uh, I could literally strum the pages and, put my finger down anywhere and just start reading and be hit by a million ideas, because he writes so richly of this universe. And and it's challenging. It's challenging to get to quash your modern sensibilities when you're into this world. For some reason, he has no problem doing. And maybe that's why he writes on a computer in a shack, that's not connected to the internet.
Yeah.
It's hard. I came up writing when I had access to the internet whenever I had a question, whenever I had a thought or needed to find another word. There's, a different sort of writer that, unfortunately I don't think I will ever be. Uh that has to go on what they've learned, that I wish these are the days that I wish I had, studied history or literature in college and not because I just don't have that base to draw on, which is very helpful for channeling character and tone of writing. But yeah, just drilling it into your head. And also, I guess sort of sometimes finding comps. Like when I was on Better Things, uh uh Pamela had us, watching Goodfellas a lot, and some of her other favorite
Of
films,
course she
which
did.
yeah, which we really like, and
Yeah.
yeah, those were great days.
Yeah.
Uh, but no, getting in there, watching, films and that had inspired her, uh, and also, finding your own ways in, on Last Ship, obviously, we dug really, really deeply into the uh, Navy mindset. We always had, working Navy officers with us in the writer's room on set. We had retired SEALs hanging out with us all the time, just telling us all these stories. And it was, mining them for as much as possible, reading books written by, these accounts, trying to just, other than nothing else, don't do anything that's going to contradict that because it will worm its way in there. Or at least that's, how I like to get started. And then you go the opposite way, then you just read things that are just totally wrong and opposite, in order to stir the pot a little bit and make sure that you're not just regurgitating anymore.
Good juxtaposition. I know this is when it's almost like in the room when it's like, all right, we can't break this, but what's the worst thing we could do here? Like, what is the
Yeah.
absolute worst idea possible? And then oftentimes that will, unlock some good ideas after everybody's, has a good laugh at, oh man, that is absolutely terrible. Could you imagine if we did
Yeah.
that? Yeah.
I often wonder how often that stuff ends up sticking because it's a common, device used. And I'm sure,
Yeah.
more often than not. Um, but there's also, no, never mind. I'm not going to go into that right now. Sorry.
Yes, it's the in comedy, it's the reversal. It's the unexpected thing. One last larger question for you, then I have a couple of short ones for you. Um, as now you're as now you're looking into subsequent seasons, congratulations. That's always in order. Uh, the Game of Thrones world and other series have a very kind of clear temporal approach, in that they're tracking time. It's story time, but it's more of a, unlike you brought up The Simpsons, unlike The Simpsons, which is it's its own time forever and locked in that period. But are you going to approach this as, I'm going to lift these characters up, potentially drop them into another time and tell a finite story? Or is this about continuation, like season two picks up right where season one left off? Or is this more, I'm going to tell another story just like this first season was, and it might be in a different time, and it will be, I don't want to say solely self-contained. This isn't an anthology, but that's kind of how the books are written, you know?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I love the idea of doing an adventure series in Westeros, and that is how the books are. It's just
Kind of like Indiana
you
Jones. Yeah. Like, yeah.
you drop in, they're in a new place, in the Sworn Sword in the second book, and there's a little bit of, what's gone on previously, where they've been for the last year and a half, uh, but it's not a lot. You have a new problem, which is introduced pretty immediately, and they go about it in their Dunk and Egg way, and I think look, one, it's very appealing, uh, because it allows you to set up a story, tell a story, then close a story and people don't have to worry if you're going to come back in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, because they've had that story told to them. If when you do come back, hopefully for another season, and they liked those characters, they can come back and be told a new story, and you don't really have to do much of a recap. It's not something that you need to follow. But the thing that I do love about Dunk and Egg is, and there's a real theme about fathers and sons, and obviously the squire and the knight, the mentee and the mentor, that sort of thing, that does benefit from watching people grow and seeing how one turns into the other. When we meet Dunk at the beginning, he's was just the squire, and now he's sort of saying, I'm going to go off and I'm going to be the guy, I'm going to be the knight. And along the way, he finds his squire, much like Sir Arlen found him. And now all of a sudden he feels like the need to put something back into this world, that, something that was given to me. I'm going to do that for this kid. And, and on the story goes. Look, George's plan for these novellas, as, you know, unwritten as they remain, would be to take Dunk and Egg through their life. What could be better? If people are still engaged, if people are still liking the stories that we're telling, um, I think that will be the ultimate payoff that you're leading to. It's not, you know, is Danny gonna get back to Westeros and get her throne back? It's not, is the dead gonna come to kill mankind? We don't have to answer those questions. We have to answer the questions about what type of person is Egg going to become? What type of person is Dunk going to become? Who else are they going to change and influence? How is that relationship going to ebb and flow over the course of, these two lives, in and out of a lot of, interesting events in Westeros history, uh, which I think hopefully could be very fulfilling. But you also aren't left with the impossible situation of wrapping up, an impossible story. It's the journey, and at the end, it's I've pitched my version of, sort of a Linklater TV show of doing, four
A
with
dunk, a
them.
dunk's life. Is that what it is? It's a dunk's life?
Yeah, yeah. For now, come back in 10 years, let Peter and Dex go off and become, superstars, and come back and do a couple more because, everybody had a good time, and then come back in another 10 years and do a couple more. I know that sounds insane, but first of all, I want to point out that the comeback gets to do it. Not that, am anywhere close to, as talented as Lisa Kudrow. But, HBO has showed a willingness to, do a TV show every 10 years,
Yeah.
so, why not, this? But
Larry
I,
David can kinda do whenever he wants to do them, so there you go.
that's
Yeah.
true. That's right. And, yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, I've always wanted to write a show that endures more than, makes a big splash initially and then sort of fades away very quickly. Like, I don't want to do something that's too zeitgeisty.
Mhm.
It should feel uh, universal and timeless. And the best way I could think of to do that is to tell, a story of, I don't know, father and son, brothers, knight and squire, whatever you want to call them, throughout the course of their lives. It's a TV show that people feel okay to like watch in bed as they're going to sleep at night. Those are the ones that.
Not nightmare inducing for sure. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, even
Yeah.
like, your West Wings and your Parks and Rec, and your TV shows that just, are hopeful. They get sad and brutal sometimes, but not so much Parks and Rec. But you know, uh, but that's the goal. That's the goal.
So, two just short questions for you because we have obviously our colleagues listen to this, but also we have many people who are listening from around the world who are aspiring to not only write, but the writing life and have questions. You've given us some really good gems about your process as a writer, as a producer, as a showrunner. Process questions for you that are more about being a professional writer than necessarily the actual craft of writing, because oftentimes there are these steps that sit in between you and the work. And one of them is pitching. You brought up before you brought up the level of detail in which you prepared for this pitch. that might be indicative of how you prepare for all of them. But if you were to distill, like, here's one tip that works for me, may not work for you guys, but one tip that I find for pitching, do you have a tip for pitching your projects?
So maybe, maybe now. Okay. So I'm gonna try this one out and we'll see. Uh,
You're going to pitch me
I
your pitch.
yeah, yeah, very good. Um, I think that it's totally okay to read your pitch the whole time. Just stare down at the page and just recite it. And and look, and I've done both. I used to think everything had to be perfectly memorized, get out there, lots of energy, big. But the problem is that with that, unless you're some sort of weirdo, you just won't include the level of detail and you won't say it the exact way that you want it. Uh, and if it's on the page, I think it actually somehow relaxes your audience enough that they pay attention more, that they see like, oh, this guy's not like out on his feet having to remember everything in the exact right order, possible. He's got it there in front of him. If he messes up, he could just go to the next thing. And it's just like, okay, we're going to get the information. Now I'm actually like listening to him. I'm not nervous for this human being in front of me anymore. So look, I don't know if that's applies all the time. I don't even know if I would do that all the time. Uh, Certainly, it depends on the type of pitch, whether or not you're pitching out a full episode and all the details, or if you're just trying to get somebody hooked with an idea, then you're going to like leave a script afterwards. I actually strangely haven't done a lot of that uh, professionally. I've just sort of bounced around from job to job. And then when I was on House of the Dragon, I ended up at HBO on a deal for a little bit and would write what they asked me to write. And then this thing fell into my lap. So thank you, HBO, for being my plumber or, Steely Pate, or I don't know. Thank you, Ryan, for, being my Sir Arlen,
There you go.
you know?
And again, that's the journey. You went from squire to now you're the knight. And so my last question for you is kind of in that vein. Like most showrunners, you have a long and circuitous career up to that. Every now and then someone will come out from nowhere and they'll become a showrunner, but most go up through a process. So you've been hired, sometimes fortuitously, sometimes by your own words. You said luckily, but I think luck is often skill that meets opportunity. But we'll set that aside. As you are now looking to potentially staff more writers' rooms, the usual question is, so what are you looking for in a writer? Okay, that's fine. You can use that if you want. But I think the more interesting question is, why would you hire you?
Look,
Yeah.
no, that's a trap because, it's,
No,
look,
because say what you the reason why I like this question is, it's not the so what are your weaknesses? What's the one thing? No, fuck it. Like, you're obviously a talented guy. And so what is it about you, your unique voice, whether it comes through on the page or comes through in the room? Why would you hire you?
look, I do like people who take their scene work very seriously. It's important to be able to tell a good story, but when 100 scripts hit your inbox, you're looking for very initially a spark, somebody paying attention to details, doing something that you really haven't seen before, doing it in a untired way. Uh, that'll that'll get you recognized right away by me. Um, you know, I would say I wouldn't hire myself because I'm a resume snob myself. Like I want people who have been vouched for by shows that I consider to be very good. Um,
I don't know. You got
I,
some good shows in your resume, Ira. I think.
no, look,
Yeah.
that's very kind of you to say. I know that people, the writers in my head that I'm thinking about, just have these perfect resumes, and I'm just like, I've always been so jealous of them. I'm just like, fuck, how did they just go from hit to hit to hit to hit? I've been very fortunate, got to, write in a variety of different genres, which is just absolutely the most fulfilling, and uh the the thing is that it actually rarely works out with the people with, when you go resume hunting like that, uh, for whatever reason. And it's, you got to meet people. You got to, I would say, bring in a bunch of people, have a bunch of interviews and talk to them. And I like when people have done their homework and who have, if they're coming in to write on book two, novella two, have read the novella, even better if you've read all of them, and come in with some passion and some thoughts. And so, I don't want you pitching me ideas, but just talk to me what you like about the characters of the show, what gets you excited. That's how I staffed season one and two. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people just came in and I just had really lovely conversations with them. And I was just like, this is the person that I want to continue to have conversations and arguments about, as we figure out what this season is going to be. So, uh, I don't know. That's more advice for the showrunner, I guess, than a writer.
No,
Is
because
just
it's being on the
interview a
other
bunch of
side.
people.
No,
Yeah.
but how to prepare to come in,
Hmm.
that dovetails with what you said earlier, which was, the preparation, and if you have the preparation, then the passion can come through. Otherwise it's, can be contrived. But
Yeah.
we've been speaking with Ira Parker, and who is the showrunner of the very successful series on HBO, Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Ira also has an amazing resume, no matter what he says, and has written on some great shows beyond just Night of the Seven Kingdoms, a lot of which you can find streaming, and you can watch some of his other work. But stay tuned for another season of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is forthcoming. Ira, thank you for joining us here on Third and Fairfax.
Thank you guys for having me. This was a real joy. I've been wanting to do this forever.
Well, now bucket list checked off the
Yeah.
box. Third and Fairfax has become a Writers Guild West bucket list, I guess. So thanks, Ira. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Third and Fairfax, the official podcast of the Writers Guild of America West. Follow Third and Fairfax on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcasting app of choice. Or subscribe to Writers Guild of America West on YouTube to never miss an episode about pitching tips, industry advice, and behind-the-scenes stories from your favorite writers of your favorite films and TV shows. If you liked this episode or have a comment, email us at podcast@wga.org. Also check out Written By, the Guild's online publication for more on writer craft, career, and the union life. And as always, I'm Brian Gary. Thanks for listening.